Good morning and welcome to the Wednesday, January 5th edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. Today, it's America's Great Resignation. We examine the job situation in America as a record 4.5 million Americans voluntarily left their jobs in November, pushing the quit rate to 3%, matching the high from September, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Workers particularly quit jobs in the hospitality industry as well as healthcare. The number of job leavers in transportation, warehouse, and utilities also increased, including layoffs and discharges. The number of total separations was 6.3 million. We examined this morning with Professor William Spriggs, a professor in the economics department at Howard University and the chief economist to the AFL-CIO. But first, let's visit the morning news headlines with Walter White, the publisher of the Cincinnati Herald, and James Wright of the Washington Informer. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to have you with us. Our first news topic this morning is this. Have you seen Jarius McCree, who is now on the Black and Missing Foundation's critically missing list? Jarius was last seen at his home in Hillsdale, Missouri at around 11 a.m. on September 13th, 2021. His wallet, headphones, and phone charger was left behind. Jarius is described as 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighing about 130 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. Importantly, Jarius has several tattoos, including a cross on the left side of his face by the bottom of his eye. Also, the name Jalen is tattooed on his left side and the name Shamika on the right side of his neck. Jarius also has a gap in the upper front tooth. Anyone with information is urged to please call 1-877-972-2634 or the Hillsdale Police Department at 314-381-0527. Let's help bring Jarius McCree home to his loved ones. We keep getting these, James, and we keep getting these disturbing missing posters and missing information from the Black and Missing Foundation. What a shame. So many folks are missing. The president just named January as National Human Trafficking Month. More has to be done, Walter and James.
And without a doubt, it's interesting because here in the District of Columbia, there's been an ongoing conversation about missing, particularly Black females. And a lot of these cases have not been solved. And there's even some in the community, particularly activists such as Philip Pinnell, who lives in Ward 8, where a lot of the missing Black people were at. In terms of whether the district government is really serious about finding these people. So this is really, really a local here in D.C. and a national problem.
Yeah, and I'm sure the Cincinnati Herald has done some coverage on this as well, Walter. What's the situation in Cincinnati? We keep hearing, I know in Cleveland last September, there was a huge raid that recovered some missing individuals.
Yeah, we've had issues with this off and on probably every year, to be quite honest with you. The problem is that when you have a missing person, you have this family involvement speaking from the Black standpoint. You have the family involvement, which is low resource and don't have a lot of, let's just say, view from the police department. And then you kind of is left up to a family, whereas when there's a white person missing, you have everybody out in the streets, out in the woods, looking for them. You got posters, you got all these resources and all this support. I think it makes it very difficult to put the same view on this Black missing person that you would see for a white missing person.
Now, yeah, and that was the idea behind the HBO documentary Black and Missing that aired last November with the founders of the Black and Missing Foundation. And we keep seeing these cases, so let's hope that we can get a resolution to Jarius McGee's case, a positive resolution. Also in the news this morning, the Omicron variant caused 95.4% of new COVID-19 cases in the United States last week, significantly higher than the previous week, according to estimates posted yesterday by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Over the past 4 weeks, Omicron has risen rapidly in estimates, accounting for 8% of the cases the week ending December 11th, almost 38% of cases the week ending the 18th of December, and then the week ending the 25th, it accounted for 77% of the cases. Now, last week, it accounts for about 95.5% of the cases. The Delta variant makes up nearly all of the rest. So we are still heavily, Walter and James, into this pandemic. Walter, we haven't heard a lot from the Cincinnati area on this, but we know that you guys are affected just as much as the rest of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday, I attended the inauguration of the new mayor and the vice mayor, and council. Our ownership, Jan Michelle Lemon Kearney, actually is a council member, and she also was appointed vice mayor. They had intended for the inauguration to be inside Music Hall, which is a historical building here, over 130 years, 140 years old, but they took it to the outside, and it was cold. So, but they basically made you have a vaccination card in the VIP area, which was the up close area to the inauguration and the speeches. But in back of the actual VIP area, which was roped in, people could stand. What I think what you saw was a bird's eye view of a lot of folks who weren't vaccinated, who were in the back, and you had to kind of recalibrate your thinking to say, well, they were back there because they weren't blessed enough to be in the VIP. But realistically, when they asked people for their card, because you had to present your card, and thank God I put mine on the phone to verify that I had been vaccinated and had taken the booster, a lot of people went around to the back. So it's really bad in Ohio. Omicron is spreading rapidly in Southwest and Northeast Ohio. And we still have a lot of hesitance. We have a lot of people just not participating in the vaccine process.
Well, before we go to our next news topic, and thank you for that insight, Walter, let's bring on the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr. Dr. Chavis, good morning.
Good morning, Stacey Brown, and good morning to Walter and to James.
Morning, Doctor.
On behalf of Colin Richards, the chair of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, representing 230 African-American owned newspapers and media companies across America, we greet everybody and congratulations, Walter. Be sure to let John Michelle Kearney know we're very proud of her now being vice mayor of the city of Cincinnati.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And also in the news this morning, the U.S. Senate will vote by Martin Luther King Day, January 17th, on whether the chamber will adopt new rules to circumvent the draconian racist filibuster to enable voting rights and social justice bills Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has announced. He says the Senate was designed to protect the political rights of the minority in the chamber through the promise of debate and the opportunity to amend. But over the years, those rights have been warped and contorted to obstruct and embarrass the will of the majority, something our founders explicitly opposed, Senator Schumer wrote in a letter to his colleagues obtained by the National Newspaper Publishers Association. He said the Constitution specified what measures demanded a supermajority, including impeachment or the ratification of treaties, but they explicitly rejected supermajority requirements for legislation, having learned firsthand of such a requirement's defects under the Articles of Confederation. So we know, Dr. Chavis, we know Walter and James, that the filibuster has a major opponent. Abolishing it or circumventing it has a major opponent in the Democratic Party, and his name is Joe Manchin.
Yes, well, again, Joe Manchin has to be held accountable by the people of West Virginia. There are more people living in poverty in West Virginia than any other state in the United States. There are more people on food stamps in West Virginia than any other state, and health disparities than any other state. The Build Back Better plan, the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Police and Justice Act, all these things. I mean, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, but the other bills that the CBC has put forward and the House has passed, all these bills would pass if it wasn't for the filibuster. So I think Senator Schumer is right to keep pushing this forward, and we hope that the Senate will adopt new rules. We'll all be watching. And I want to thank Martin Luther King's family for telling everybody that, until we get voting rights, we're going to put on pause the national celebration of Dr. King's birthday. I think that was a bold, courageous move by the King family to put more pressure on the Senate, put more pressure on the Biden-Harris administration to first and foremost restore voting rights to all Americans.
Yeah, well, we're going to see how this plays out, but we already know, and Senator Manchin again yesterday reiterated that he would not support any circumvention or changes to the filibuster. So we will see the negotiating skills of Senator Chuck Schumer and, again, the President Joe Biden, because these are issues that they want resolved. They say they want resolved anyway, and certainly needs to be resolved. This morning, the Great Resignation, America's Great Resignation, has continued. What are people doing to make a living today? A record 4.5 million Americans voluntarily left their jobs in November, according to BLS, pushing the quit rate to 3%, matching the high from September. Workers particularly quit jobs in the hospitality industry as well as healthcare. The number of job leavers in transportation, warehousing, and utilities also increased. So including layoffs and discharges, the number of total separations was 6.3 million. Let's discuss as we bring on our special guest, Professor William Spriggs of Howard University's Economics Department, and he also is a chief economist to the AFL-CIO. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Good to see you again, Dr. Travis.
Good to see you, Dr. Spriggs, and thank you for your leadership. And Dr. Spriggs is a long-distance runner. He's been the major economist for Black America, for Howard University, and for all the progressive forces in America. And we're always pleased to have you with the Black press, and want you to know that we support your efforts.
Thank you.
Well, with Dr. Chavis and Professor Spriggs, we got two HU representatives. Yesterday was FAMU Day. Today is HU Day here on Let It Be Known. Professor Spriggs, the great exodus, the great resignation, as they're saying. What do you make of this?
It really is a problem of job matching. This was going to be a problem once the United States, that's the we I'm talking about, chose a policy of separation as opposed to retention to make it through the virus. All other countries, all other industrial countries held employees in place. So what took place in Europe and Australia and Canada were schemes where the government paid employers to keep employees connected to their jobs through the pandemic. And we went the route of putting people on unemployment, separating from their jobs. And then you got to reconnect them. And the matching process is very complicated. So this isn't really the great quit because it's not uniform. Manufacturing, the quit rate hasn't changed very much. In construction, it hasn't changed very much. And most of the high wage industries where jobs are desirable, you don't see the quit rate up very high. It is higher than it was last year, but it's not up the way it is in leisure and hospitality and in accommodations in particular. And it's not up in every state. So you got to remember that some of our states have very good unemployment insurance systems. So New Jersey, which has the best in terms of the share of unemployed people who get unemployment benefits, and in terms of the replacement rate. What do I get compared to what I used to make when I get unemployment? In New Jersey, the quit rate isn't up because you get better job matches. We didn't see the quit rate rise when we had the supplement to the unemployment benefit, because people could choose the best job. Now we force people to take jobs. And so when you force people to take jobs, you're going to get mismatches. You're going to get people who are only taking the job because I run out of money and I better have some paycheck, and this isn't the job I'm going to stay in. And you see that in the accommodation sector. Their firing rate is down. So they're trying their best to retain people. They're not letting people go, but they still want to do their own idea of what's flexible. That is, what's flexible for the owner, right? They still want to have their own sense of hours. So they're still jamming people on hours. They are still paying lower wages. And as a consequence, with the shift in demand that's been taking place, we've had record levels of online shopping. People are getting tested at much higher rates. We've had a shift in demand to other sectors, and the result is that workers can find jobs in other sectors, and they don't have to put up with bad jobs. So it's really the bad jobs that are finding the quit rate up.
Yeah, and one of the things too we're finding, and just to underscore what the professor had said there, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said that positions in finance and insurance, as well as the federal government, have increased. Jobs have increased. James Wright and Walter White. One of the things that we keep hearing, though, among African Americans in particular, young African Americans, is that they're starting their own businesses. They're leaving the workforce and starting their own business. Some is not even going into the workforce. What do you make of that? James, Walter, one of you.
Well, I guess I'll start. It's interesting that you bring that up, because I've been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs lately, young people here in the district, who just decided that they don't want to go to work for the government and they don't want to work for somebody else. They want to go out here and take advantage of the opportunities that are available, that the district government and the district economy offers. And a lot of them are African-American women. Surprisingly, because African-American women here in the district do very well in terms of employment. But I think people are now looking at and reassessing their lives and determining they want to take a different direction than the usual get a job and then work that job 30 years and then retire. They want to do more with their life. And I think African-Americans are looking in that direction.
And Walter, Professor Spriggs laid out like New Jersey being the best place for matches. What are you seeing in Cincinnati?
Well, if you look at the mainstream general market presentation on the matter, Cincinnati is a hotbed for jobs, but we all know that doesn't necessarily affect minorities here in any region of the country. I have a kind of unique situation. My other owner of our businesses is actually the president of the African American Chamber, and he completely agrees that Black, especially a lot of young Blacks, are seeking their own jobs because they're coming to the chamber for advice. How do I start my own business? How do I make my own job? How do I build my own wealth and create jobs with other minorities? And that's one of the key factors in this whole idea of starting your own business if you're a minority. I want to create jobs for other minorities. And yes, it's mostly Black females at this point, because a lot of the Black females have kind of hit the top of their corporate ladder. I mean, that means that glass ceiling is a lot lower for them than, say, a white female. So the pandemic has spurred a lot of young African Americans to say, now is the time. I can do it. I survived the pandemic. I can build my own business and survive my life in the way I want to have a life.
And Professor, one of our viewers, loyal viewers, David Youngblood, we appreciate David. He writes in that the best thing ever for low-wage workers was the pandemic. People are making it clear, he says, they want an adjustment in wages. He says the demand is a livable wage. Is that a fact, Professor?
Well, when we supplemented the unemployment benefit, we did a great service to everyone by finally covering low-wage workers. Most people didn't understand this, including low-wage workers. So I think it was a big shock to a lot of workers who work year-round and found out I can't get unemployment. In Ohio, if you work 30 hours a week, every week in the year, and you had a minimum wage job in Ohio, you were not eligible for unemployment insurance.
Yep.
You didn't qualify. And I think for a lot of workers, that opened their eyes. They thought, I think some of them thought, they had a safety net. And that awakening about how bad these jobs were for them, because they weren't being protected by the safety net, has added to this idea that, I don't want those jobs anymore because we don't value them. But without the pandemic unemployment assistance, they have no safety net whatsoever.
Yeah. Dr. Tavis, I know you have a good relationship with members in the Biden-Harris administration, including Cedric Richmond. What's the what's the sense that you get?
Well, the sense that I get is that, first of all, we all have to get through this pandemic. If you don't have health, you're not going to be able to work. If you don't have health, you're not going to be able to own your own business. So we got to take care of the health of America, in particular Black America. And but the Biden-Harris administration is forecasting that the economy in the United States is going to turn up in 2022. And that's going to affect how people feel about participating in a democracy. I think economics and politics are linked. Sometimes we have a separate discussion about economics, a separate discussion about politics, but they're actually co-joined. When you have as Professor Spriggs has noted, when we develop public policy that will help low-income workers, everybody in the economy benefited from that, not just low-income workers. And so I think that the global economy is changing. I would like Professor Spriggs to explain to our audience that what the decisions we make in the United States are not isolated from decisions that the rest of the world is making. We're living in a digital age. We're moving from a service economy to a digital economy, to a robotic economy. That's why I interviewed the robot last night. I think that we have to get on the front end of the curve about where the new job opportunities are and where the new entrepreneurial opportunities. Young people say they want to go into business. Well, there's certain kind of businesses you should go into. You just shouldn't start any kind of business. And if you want to have a good job, good paying job, there's certain sectors of the economy that provide good jobs right now. So we need the right information at the right time. That's what we need. And hopefully the Biden-Harris administration will step up its messaging to all Americans, but particularly to communities of color, how to get ahead of this curve rather than lag behind.
Yeah, Claudette Perry, the NMPA's executive administrator, mentions that people also realize the government could do more. It put out billions to maintain the USA's economy. James, I know you had a question for the professor.
Yes, I did. Okay. Yes, I did. It's interesting that Claudette Perry talked about the jobs, because you had John Jacob, a former president of the National Urban League, talked about a Marshall Plan for jobs for Black people, particularly in the inner cities. But my question is that Dr. Spriggs, is 1.4 million Black men lag behind white males, Asian males in terms of employment. This is according to one of your colleagues, Algernon Austin, who works for the Center for Economic Policy and Research. Also, Austin says that unemployment in the Black community costs $50 billion a year. Could you talk about that?
The big shock that happened back in 2020 when the United States, decided that my colleague Dr. Carr keeps saying we're not we, but anyway, when the United States decided that we would kick people out of their jobs, it was really astounding that the Black unemployment rate did not go through the roof. In fact, by proportion, Blacks didn't suffer much worse than others, and there were other groups that suffered much worse job loss as a proportion. The difference has been who got hired back. And quickly, really quickly, the market restored the balance of the disparity in unemployment because everybody else was getting hired back except us. And so it's quite clear the problem is discrimination. It's not like, oh, in June, when the phenomena really hit hard, that Black people aren't being hired back, everybody else is. You can't say from March to June that Black people became dumber, lost skills, were in the wrong industry. We weren't in the wrong industry when the jobs got lost. We kept our jobs at a higher rate than others. So it's not the industrial structure, it's not our skills. It's all dealing with, can we fight discrimination? Can we prevent a repeat that history has constantly done of locking us out? And this is not a skills question. You know, we have to remember that the largest occupation for Black people is IT. That is our largest occupation. There are more Black people who do IT than are public school teachers, more Black people do IT than postal workers, than social workers. I mean, you know, this notion that our problem is that we can't code, this is ridiculous. And this has a specific reason. There's a specific reason why this story keeps being retold, because these people want to justify inequality. And the way to do that is to always argue about the inferiority of Black people. And that justifies why the world can be unequal. Look, the world is working correctly. Black people are where they're supposed to be because, you know, they're less qualified. Think of that movie, Hidden Figures, right? It's not that some white people were doing the computer programming for NASA. It's Black people who were doing the computer programming for NASA.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so before these people were even born, the people who are now, you know, run Silicon Valley, they weren't even born. We had already done the programming. That was our job. That was our job. They are on the shoulders of Black people who did the coding. So for them to suddenly claim that somehow or another we can't code, that's like saying y'all can't play baseball. I never heard of Henry Aaron. Who's he?
Wow, Dr. Spriggs, thank you so much for breaking that down. I know Walter White of the Cincinnati Herald, you had a question for the professor as well as we wind down.
Yeah, quick question, Professor. Here in Cincinnati, just like a lot of cities in America, gentrification has displaced a lot of Black and brown people. In our city, I can give you an example. In the area I actually grew up in, which was for the poor, the West End of Cincinnati has probably been 75% gentrified. And now MSL, which is Major League Soccer, put a stadium right in the heart of what was left of what we would call the Black center of Cincinnati culture and life, which is the West End. And now, of course, around that 25,000 seat stadium is all kind of pop-up restaurants, pop-up stores, pop-up this, pop-up that. Now, this is the irony behind the whole part of what I just mentioned to you, is that there is a high school right in front of the stadium, which is the high school for the neighborhood, the Major League Soccer stadium. And now we're looking at a situation where they call the stadium the spaceship in the West End. But the reality is what's left of what Black people actually had a base is getting ready to totally disappear. And that's Cincinnati, but I wonder how much of that gentrification has spawned other massive structures and massive companies in their area that just continually push Black people out, and they have nowhere to go. I want to make that clear. They have nowhere to go in Cincinnati. These are people who are moving out, and they're going out a lot of times with garbage bags with their belongings.
Yeah, well, Washington D.C. is the home of gentrification as well, including the area around Howard. So some of that dynamic is changing because of the pandemic, and a lot of the movement of people to the city and shortening their commute changed dramatically, and housing prices have reflected that. So that a good thing about the pandemic, if you want to call it that, has been the shift in demand for housing, so that in major cities, rents have not been going up as quickly as they have in some of the smaller cities. And that has had an impact because the inflation hasn't hit the Black community in the same way because we are so concentrated in some of these cities. But the placement of stadiums can be a genesis for jobs because it can hit the sweet spot for a lot of Black entrepreneurs. Stadiums create foot traffic for restaurants, for personal services, the kind of industries that are easy for us to enter. They have a low barrier of entry. And so if it's done correctly, the city can have it as a lifting point for Black business if it's done correctly. If it's done correctly, unfortunately, a lot of our young people don't pay attention to a sport we're not as familiar with, but they need to pay attention to what top soccer players get paid. I mean, what you get paid as a soccer player pales, right? When you look at some of our top athletes, we hopefully the stadium, because it sits empty, becomes the home stadium for that high school, and we introduce a lot of kids to a sport in which they get paid millions of dollars for being good athletes, millions of dollars.
Yeah,
There's more money in soccer in the world than there is in any other sport. So I if it's done properly, all of these things can be inspirations. They can be launching pads if it's done properly. And one of the big things about the Build Back Better plan that the president is putting in place is to correct a lot of the former mistakes made in urban removal, as people in the Black community consider what was urban renewal. And of course, we know this very well in Washington with the removal of Black people from Capitol Hill area, from Southwest Washington. So a lot of this is to correct highways that separated our neighborhoods, and there are a lot of projects going on to undo the breakup of our neighborhoods, the breakup of our old business districts, and hopefully that's what cities will be planning to take advantage of. And
Dr. Spriggs, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have gone over time. The information is so important. We certainly thank you. We have to extend an invitation for you to come back. Walter White of the Cincinnati Herald, we so appreciate you as well. And James Wright, our colleague at the Washington Informer. And of course, Dr. Chavis, always appreciate. We know Dr. Chavis has a busy slate of things today, tomorrow, and throughout the rest of the week, as always. So we thank you so much. And don't forget, the NNPA's Midwinter Conference kicks off this January 19th. We're in person again for the first time in 2 years. We'll be at the Diplomat Beach Resort in Hollywood, Florida, where the theme is the publishing industry, advancing the Black press of America, reaffirming, engaging, and empowering. And visit www.nnpa-events.com to register. You can reserve a hotel room and join us, because we're going to be live there. And Dr. Chavis dropped the bombshell yesterday. The great Stephanie Mills is going to join us for a special performance for the National Newspaper Publishers Association and all of its guests at the convention, at the conference, starting January 19th. We're going to follow strict COVID safety procedures. So if you want to join us, know that the NNPA will be practicing strict COVID safety procedures. Tomorrow, we have a very, very special show on the 1-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. Join us tomorrow for that special presentation that we will have in store for you tomorrow. Let it be known. We will see you then.